Suburbanites, listen up. If you live in any of a dozen or so villages, you've got some pretty important elections to decide on Tuesday, April 1st. So let's give you the 360-degree flyover, starting on the south edge of the region in Orland Park. That's where two-term incumbent Republican Keith Pekow is facing a challenge from Jim Dodge, a former village trustee, also a Republican. The two are former neighbors, but the race has been anything but neighborly, with attack ads and accusations of racism. Pekow has received support from some business, Dodge from labor unions and public safety groups. Now let's move north over to the Fox Valley in the second largest city in Illinois, Aurora. Two-term incumbent Richard Irvin says the town's undergone a revival on his watch, with lots of new development and entertainment venues, as well as a dramatic reduction in violent crime.
In 2024, Aurora recorded just one homicide, a quickly resolved domestic incident. Let me repeat, just one in the second largest city in the entire state of Illinois.
But he's facing a challenge from Aurora resident Democrat John Lash, backed by the Illinois Democratic Party. Lash has been wheeling about town trying to convince voters Irvin's record on development is all smoke and mirrors, with millions in city tax subsidies being steered to Irvin cronies and business.
This is all lucrative development deals for his campaign donors and politically connected few tied to City Hall, tied to his campaign, that all seem to be on the inside.
Now let's move further north to Arlington Heights, potential new home of the Chicago Bears. 3 candidates are gunning for an open seat there. They are architect and business owner Jim Tenaglia, Tom Schwingbeck, a local business owner and trustee, and John Ridler, head of the local Chamber of Commerce. And now closer to the city, Oak Park, where the local Wednesday Journal says the race for village president has gotten personal and somewhat chippy. Incumbent Vicky Skaman is going toe-to-toe with village trustee Ravi Parakat. And wait, you might live in a town that doesn't have a race for village executive on the ballot, but it does have an important question you have to answer. So let's go west of O'Hare to Bensonville, where village president Frank DeSimone is running unopposed, but a ballot referendum is asking residents whether they want to change the town's form of government, where they would get rid of the role of village manager and replace it with a system where the village president does all of that himself. That could result in a more than 300% increase in Mr. DeSimone's salary. Needless to say, he wants voters to approve it. Is that what it's about, increasing your salary and your pension?
So, and again, let's compare apples to apples. I get a part-time salary for being a part-time mayor, right? Anybody who gets a full-time job would expect a full-time salary. We are going to get a full-time salary out of it at probably $130,000+ a year, less than what we would pay a village manager.
But DeSimone has some detractors in town, including Peter Georgakis, who says it could lead to corruption.
If the government changes, that means that Frank DeSimone, village president, trustees, could buy up the properties for themselves, resell it, have full control, and there'll be a lot of corruption. A lot of corruption.
And back west to River Forest, where village residents will vote on whether to institute term limits for their elected officials. That sparked some unexpected contentious debate in that leafy burg, where a certain Fox 32 political reporter called home for the first 21 years of his life. Who could that be? Folks, the stakes couldn't be higher. We tend to get caught up in national politics, but municipal elections matter. It's hard to find an aspect of life that local government doesn't impact, from your property tax to your crime to roads to parks to overall quality of life. And yet, voter turnout is typically shockingly low. So Suburban Chicago, you got a chance to turn that around this Tuesday. Make a plan. Support your village. You can't change things by posting on Facebook, but you can by submitting your ballot. And that's our opening shot.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Trump, Hegseth, Walz, the fallout from Signalgate, what Illinois lawmakers want done about it. Plus, a state takeover of CPS? One Chicago representative says it's time to force the discussion. And Richard Roeper hangs it up after 40 years at the Sun-Times. What's next for Chicago's premier film and television critic? Paris on Politics is next.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics, where we go behind the headlines and beyond the spin. The fallout from Signalgate has been steep. Republicans and Democrats criticizing Trump administration national security officials for accidentally inviting a journalist into a top-secret group chat on the Slack app. Democrats have turned their ire to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who posted top-secret attack plans on that group text. It's something national security experts say is a breach of protocol and a threat to national security. Democrats like Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy say it's time for Hegseth to go.
Hegseth must resign. Let's not forget, even before this, Hegseth's personal misconduct and lack of qualifications raised red flags. He never should have had access to our most sensitive secrets or been entrusted with leading the Department of Defense.
Nobody's texting war plans. There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
But the president is standing by his national security team for now, and joining us is another Illinois Democratic Congressman, Jonathan Jackson of the Southside 1st Congressional District. Congressman, thanks for being here. You heard the Defense Secretary's explanation there. It was not classified information in his view that was shared. Do you buy that?
No, that's not true. It's not accurate. It's not honest. There's something called the SCIF, where we go for classified briefings, which is a secured, compartmented information facility. People in the State Department and the Pentagon and the President, they travel with the SCIF, which is simply a room where they cannot have a Bluetooth, watch, earpiece, phone, and you look at the documents. This information was not meant to be on that SCIF. It was outside the SCIF. And the problem that's so troubling is the depth to which he went outside of the protocols. He's violated the Federal Records Act. You're not supposed to have disappearing messages. This is a private server that Signal's owned by nonprofit Signal. Like, these are private contractors. What are you doing? So he's like gone way along the pale, over the pale, and he's a danger and a risk for the safety of our service members.
There's been a lot of calls for him to resign. It doesn't seem like he would do that if the president wants to that. What do you want to see happen?
I'd like to see him resign. I was the first person, when you check the record, to ask for Mr. Hegseth to resign. There were 18 people on that chain for the Signal app. And then there were other people that were invited on. That needs to be investigated. How did someone get invited into that group chat? And what other things has he already breached and gone beyond the pale? So you're supposed to lead by example, and he's a terrible example. He never was qualified. He's been on this tick about DEI. Well, he's a candidate that definitely didn't earn it. And he's disqualifying people that have more experience and more seriousness about this. When he unceremoniously fired the Joint Chiefs of Staff Brown, that was wrong. He needs to call General Brown back and let him be the Secretary of Defense, sir.
So you talk about DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and Hegseth has vowed to take on the, quote, wokeification of the military, whatever that means. There really is no consensus definition of that. And it's resulted in erasing things from their website, I believe the Tuskegee Airmen and other things like that. What should be done to push back on that, do you believe?
Well, first of all, on that issue, he's breaking the law. In the Students for Fair Admissions, the law stated that you cannot have race-conscious-based decisions for admissions in the oldest public university, University of North Carolina, founded 1789, the oldest private institution, Harvard, founded 1636. But in that Students for Fair Admission, they said the military can have affirmative action. The military can have diversity programs. That was the amicus brief that was submitted to the United States Supreme Court, and it was accepted.
So you're saying
so
Supreme
he's
Court
humiliating
ruled that DE&I and affirmative action actually should apply to the military?
100%. Colin Powell is an example of DEI. He got in there under the program of affirmative action. And so taking down Black history marks, taking down the Navajo code talkers, taking down women's contribution, taking down the statue of Jackie Robinson and his references is wrong. It's humiliating. It's tearing apart the cohesion of the military force. He talks about he wants to have a strong military fighting force. He is now he's polarizing racially and creating antagonism within the military. He is not fit to lead.
Well, what is, Democrats are in the minority here in all these branches, and the Trump administration has signaled a clear movement away from everything you're talking about. Is the recourse then just through the courts?
Well, no. We have started, I'm glad, with my colleague, Congressman Cleo Fields out of Louisiana, and Congressman Danny Davis has been extremely supportive. We have formed a diversity, equity, inclusion caucus. We affirm the right of corporations, of law firms, of universities to have their right to freedom of association, to guide their private enterprise. This is government overreach. The government should not be telling law firms and private institutions and universities how they should conduct themselves. DEI, when we talk about, these are not laws, diversity, equity, inclusion. These are aspirations. These are American values. This man, the President of the United States, is going through our government with a wrecking ball. He is damaging the very fabric of our society. And so we're pushing back. So we disagree, over 20 of us, with the definition from the executive branch. We are not a holding company. We're not a subsidiary of Mr. Elon Musk or Mr. Donald J. Trump. We affirm our right and stand beside all those corporations and organizations, institutions, law firms that want to continue to pursue the path of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So you're saying that is there a mechanism to protect companies that want to pursue DE&I from retaliation from the Trump administration?
Right. So we're going to have to end up going into the courts. There have been multiple lawsuits that have been filed. We're going to be organizing to let those persons know, us people in the House of Representatives, we stand beside your initiative, and we recognize it legally. We need to see a legal definition from Mr. Donald J. Trump. What is diversity? When he came out on January 20th and says, this wild, wasteful, reckless, fraud, illegal DEI program we're going to eliminate, what's fraudulent? What's immoral? What's reckless about DEI? We have to affirm the right of every citizen. We've got to start by affirming the rights of everyone in the military. They're putting their lives on the line. Taking down the statues and the reference to the accomplishments of Jackie Robinson is extremely race baiting and is very humiliating to those service members and women that are fighting on our behalf every day.
All right, Congressman Jonathan Jackson of the 1st Congressional District, thank you for being here with us, and best of luck to you in your work ahead.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
A state takeover of CPS. One Chicago representative says it's time to have that discussion.
Lou, what you doing?
Hey, Caitlin, I'm looking for this stream everyone's talking about.
Fox Local?
Yeah.
Get me. App Store, download Fox Local, open it, pick Chicago, boom.
Oh, that was easy. Hey, Paris. Hey, I got this stream on my phone finally.
I'm on there.
Everyone's on this thing.
Now you can watch Paris on Politics anytime, anywhere.
Hey, Anita, I'm on Fox Local.
I know, Lou. I watch you on Bears Blitz on Fox Local.
Fox Local. This is big stuff.
Glad I could help.
An Illinois Democratic lawmaker is proposing a state takeover of Chicago public schools. The state has done this to school systems in the past when finances got to the point of insolvency, and now one lawmaker believes CPS is on the verge of that very situation. This comes as the district is trying to finalize a labor contract with the Chicago Teachers Union, and fights abound over how to make financial ends meet. And joining us now is the bill's sponsor, Chicago Democrat Curtis Tarver. Representative Tarver, thanks for joining us. So you're proposing a bill that would have the State Finance Authority take over the duties of the Chicago Board of Education and essentially be ultimately responsible for CPS. How come?
CPS has some issues. There's some leadership issues. There's some leadership issues at the city. You look at the appointments that have been made to the CPS board. So there's just concern all around. CPS can't seem to figure out what to do financially. There's an issue, obviously, negotiating a contract that taxpayers are on the hook for. And so this is not, new precedent. This happened in the past when CPS was borrowing to the hilt, going to two private banks for the most part, and really unable to balance his books in a way that is responsible to taxpayers and most importantly to the students who attend those schools.
All right, so how would this work? Would CPS basically be having to report back to the state on all of its finances, and the board basically their powers and duties would be taken away?
Well, this will shock you, but they'd actually have to put together a financial plan that others would have the opportunity to look at, to review and determine whether or not the decisions that they're attempting to make are ones that are in the best interest of children and keep the district on a solid financial path.
This would seem to be something that would be difficult for a lot of Democrats to support. Are you kind of sending a shot across the bow here, or do you intend for this to try and move and perhaps get voted on?
I would love to have it move and be voted upon. I think it's a necessary bill. In the interim, I'm looking to have at least a subject matter on April 10th to allow all sides to come together and really have a candid conversation. I mean, I think that there's a need to allow CTU to state its position. There's a need for CPS to state its position. And then certainly for other legislators who represent the city of Chicago and otherwise to have an opportunity to weigh in as well. I think that a lot of individuals profess to care about children. A bill like this will let us know very quickly if the focus is truly on the children as opposed to the adults in the room.
And it would seem that the Chicago Teachers Union would be vehemently opposed to this. What would be your message to them?
Oh, I don't know that they would necessarily be opposed. I guess, I can understand if there was some concern about the state taking over, particularly when there is an elected school board. We don't have a fully elected school board. That was fought for initially. Now we have a hybrid board. Most individuals are picked by the mayor, so I think we're kind of right back in the same situation that we were in before. So I'm open to hear what CPS would have to, CTU and CPS would have to say about the bill, but I don't want to be presumptuous and say that they would be against it. And certainly I'm happy to work to allay the concerns of both sides, but ultimately my focus is the children.
Can the state handle a responsibility like this? This is a giant district, multiple billion-dollar budget.
I think so. We're in a state right now where we're having to deal with quite a few different things. The federal government is not being very friendly to us. And so I think it's a perfect time to, take a look at things across the state, including CPS in this matter. But I definitely think there's the bandwidth at the state level. And we're in a budget season, right? So if there were a need to discuss, finances and more employees or how that relates on the state side, we can do that. But also there's a board, that these individuals, CPS will report to. And that's not a paid board, right? So there's some volunteer action here as well.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Richard Roeper hangs it up after 40 years at the Sun-Times.
This weekend, kick back and catch up with Fox 32 on Fox Local. Recap the week's must-know news.
A Chicago police officer trying his best to capture this coyote.
Relive Fox 32's best.
Today, I'm taking you on the Chicago water taxi.
Plus the latest political and sports buzz.
Why pick this fight with the governor who you need?
Let's talk about championship weekend.
Watch live or anytime on demand. Weekends at Fox 32 on Fox Local. Download now on these streaming services.
Richard Roeper spent nearly 40 years at his dream job, the Chicago Sun-Times, most of that as a widely read features columnist. He has more than 16,000 bylines under his belt. He also co-hosted the popular Ebert and Roeper show and has spent stints hosting programs on multiple radio and television stations, including right here as a morning host at Fox 32. And now Roeper just announced he'll be leaving the Sun-Times as part of recent round of buyouts there, but he says he is not slowing down. And Richard Roeper joins us now. So great to see you, Richard. How difficult a decision was this?
Well, first of all, I'm exhausted just hearing about all that. I should have taken a buyout earlier, Paris. And also, I was here, and I left the Twinkie in a desk, and it's still here, I noticed, when I went through the news.
Well, Twinkies never go sour.
Exactly. But listen, it's actually, I got to say something. I'm a big fan of yours. I watch all the time. I love being in these chairs because they feel like Don Corleone's office chairs when they tell Tom Hagen he's going to have to go to Vegas. That is very conducive to a good conversation.
We cut a lot of deals here. We make a lot of deals in this studio.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just none of it's personal. It's just business.
It's just business, exactly.
Business. Yeah.
Just like our business.
Yeah, just like our business. So again, I mean, how difficult was this?
It was really tough, Paris. I grew up in the south suburbs and grew up in Dalton. My dad would come home from work. The Sun-Times was the paper in my neighborhood. That's what everybody read. And I really dreamt of, not so much of doing radio and television, but I wanted to write for the Sun-Times, and I was able to do it, editorial assistant, general news reporter, news columnist, and then eventually making my way over to the entertainment side. So it's been the thing in my life for more than half of my life. The one constant has been working for the Sun-Times.
Despite all these other jobs you've had. I mean, you've been on every TV show, I think, that's been created since the 1990s.
Well, they only keep me for 3 years, and I'm like George Costanza. Thank you. You got to know when to leave. But that is the interesting thing. In our business, especially on the broadcast side, you're probably going to go from place to place. The days of Walter Cronkite anchoring the same place for 30 years are gone. But for the newspaper, I was at the Sun-Times all through that, Paris, through all different types of regimes and editors and changes and different newsrooms. We were at 401 North Wabash, which is now the Trump Tower. We were over on the West Loop. Now we're on Navy Pier. But the one constant was the people and the paper, and I just loved writing for the paper.
And especially, I can tell in the heyday, like in the 90s, when the Bulls were winning, it had to be really exciting.
Yeah, it was.
16,000 bylines. You've also written a bunch of books we should mention. Is there a column that stands out to you as the most difficult that you ever did?
That's a great question. It was when I was doing news columns, and I had some great editors all through the years, and there's still a lot of great people there now, but I did have one editor who kept encouraging me to be a little more personal. You gotta open up a little bit. So I would write sometimes about how neighborhoods were changing in different ways in Chicago, and how we were having gang problems, and the Cabrini Green, Dan Charles Davis shooting, which made national headlines. So it was finding the courage and the honesty to kind of talk about how that affected me personally. And those are the columns that resonated with people, where I'd hear from so many readers as well.
What about, my next question then you kind of answered, the most rewarding?
Those were, and then sometimes, in the middle of everything, just making people laugh was also, I loved doing that. And the great thing, and this, back in the day, and there still are some of these, the general interest columnist, I could write about almost anything 5 days a week. So you mentioned the 90s, and I recognized early on that the Bulls were the story. They weren't just the sports story, they were the news story. So I got to cover, Dennis Rodman and his crazy book signing where he wore a wedding dress on Michigan Avenue. And then Michael, when he sent the fax to the newsroom saying he was unretiring. And
it just said, it was a fax that came in and said, I'm back.
I'm back. So I felt a little bit, I kind of a Forrest Gump experience there, because then I was also doing entertainment. So they'd say, hey, we want to send you out to LA to interview Sean Connery or Jack Lemmon, some of the old school stars, or this young actress named Julia Roberts just did a movie called Pretty Woman. Let's go do, and they would fly me out there. It was a different time.
Well, and that kind of segues into you taking over for the late, great Gene Siskel and doing Ebert and Roeper, reviewing films, being a film critic. It's not exactly what you set out to do, correct? You kind of had to transition into that.
But, I also felt at some point, Paris, covering the news and writing about the news was also, it takes a certain breed, that. I mean, the reporters that go out there day in and day out and report on the shootings and the politics and the heavy stuff. And I thought at some point, I love pop culture, I always have. So I was making that segue several years before I actually started on the show with Roger. And I said, I'm going to write about pop culture, I'm going to write about entertainment. Sometimes it's going to be serious, sometimes it's going to be, something that people are really passionate about, but it's not going to be life or death.
And Roger Ebert, a hero of mine. I think he's the best writer that I think I've ever read. What did you learn from him, from those years with him?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because Roger and, of course, Gene Siskel became, Letterman famous, and caricatures of them and national television and all that. And they were great at that. But Roger would have loved hearing that from you, because he considered, same way, he grew up in Champaign-Urbana. He was the editor of the paper, the college newspaper. He was a newspaper man. And he loved getting scoops, but he was also a beautiful writer. He would write on other topics. So I learned a lot of my writing style came, before I even met him, just from reading him. You know how you watch your favorite broadcasters or you read your favorite writers, and it's the best way. And you're not imitating them, but you're taking the tips from them. And one of the things I learned from Roger was, he was a real intellect, but he was writing for the Chicago Sun-Times. And that doesn't mean they're not very, very smart, but you're in a more conversational tone. I always wanted to write a review as if you and I had gone out for a beer at the Billy Goat, and you said, well, tell me about this movie. And then the 900 words I would write would be what I would be telling you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. When I did Week in Review at another state, I wanted it to be like we're at the Billy Goat. We're just kind of having a beer and talking about what happened this week. Speaking of newspapers and the Sun-Times, all these buyouts, is it going to survive? What's going to happen?
I really hope so. I want nothing more than to see that. I love the fact that we're still a two-newspaper town, whereas most cities other than New York, it's down to one newspaper. It's evolving for sure. One of the reasons I took the buyout was I could see the emphasis was changing a little bit, and I was doing 7 or 8 reviews a week. And in addition to movies, now I'm reviewing television series, and if it's a 9-part series, you get 1 review out of that. So I felt I was a little bit on the hamster wheel, but also, the thing isn't the thing at some point, and that doesn't mean it's better or worse, it just means it's different. So I saw this opportunity, as did Rick Tellender and Mike Sneed. So, first of all, it was going to stave off layoffs for other staff members, and we're in a better position than somebody who might be 38 and has a spouse and 2 kids and is maybe not going to have other opportunities if they get laid off. So there's that feeling that you feel good about. Still not easy, still very bittersweet. It was very strange just in the last 5 days, for the first time since the late 80s that I didn't have a deadline to meet. Like every day I think, okay, by 6 o'clock I got to file this, by 2 o'clock Tuesday, I'd have my little deadlines printed out on my refrigerator and of course on my Google Calendar. And it was a little unnerving to not have that this week, I'll have to be honest.
What's next for you? You've always been on multiple platforms, podcasts, radio, TV. Where can viewers, readers expect to find you now?
I'm going to continue doing my podcast, and I came up with the title for this a few years ago. Let me know what you think of it. It's called The Richard Roeper Podcast.
I don't know. I think you need to get it. You got to do some market research. Get a focus group in.
When people ask me, like, how do I find it? I go, just go to Spada, Odyssey, Prime, Apple Podcasts, wherever fine podcasts are heard. And I do want to keep writing one way or another. I don't think it's going to be 8 reviews a week, but again, that's what I love the most. So as they say, stay tuned. I think I'll have something soon to announce.
All right, Richard Roeper, I've always been a fan of yours. Thank you so much for talking
to me.
Let's do it again.
You got it anytime.
All right, thanks again. And that's our show for this week. Enjoy the spring weather and baseball and those unbelievable Bulls barreling toward a playoff seed. So long, everyone.